Time now for the Sunday Talk. Tonight, a special panel remembering the legacy of Muhammad Ali with two Canadians whose lives and careers were deeply affected by him. Stephen Brunt is a journalist with Sportsnet. He's also the author of Facing Ali, a book about the former boxer's life. And Spider Jones is a broadcaster and former amateur boxer who had a long friendship with Ali. Thanks to both of you for being with us tonight. So, Spider, I think you first met him back in the 60s. Tell us about that and the impact he had on you.
In 1966, I just gotten released from Millbrook, where I'd served 2 years for, let's just say, larcenous behavior. But I had nowhere to live, and George Chavello had arranged for me to live at Sully's gym. And my job was to keep the gym clean. And I remember the first time I met him, he'd been in the dressing room being interviewed. I believe it was by Howard Cosell at the time. So he came out of the dressing room, and Andrew called him over and said, "I want you to meet Spider Jones. He's a Golden Glove fighter." And so Ali walks out. He's got that mock glare on, like he's trying to scare the hell out of me. But everybody knew Ali liked to clown around. So I look back at him, I'm like this here. And he says, "You bad or something?" I said, "No, I'm just bad enough to keep the bad cats off me." And he laughed and he said, "I want to go you right here and now." And I went to take my jacket off. And he ran and hid behind Angelo and said, "Don't hit me, man. I'll bleed all over you." That's how we first met.
What did he mean to you? It sounds like he's had an impact in turning your life around.
You know what we shared in common? And I found out after our first sparring session, I used to spar with him, but I was just something light that he'd use. And I remember the first time I sparred with him, I was scared. I thought he would humiliate me. But he didn't. He said, "Come in and push me, hit me, work on me." So I did. We're in the dressing room after, and we began to talk music. He loved Sam Cooke, and he loved Stand By Me. And I got ready to sing Stand By Me and give him a history of all these great R&B singers back in the day. It blew his mind. He said, "Man, I was born to be the champion of the world. You were born to be in radio." And that's what he said to me, and we just had that kind of relationship. Whenever I'd see him, "Spider Jones, sing Stand By Me for me."
So he pushed you to take a risk.
He said that. He said, "Man," I said, "there ain't no black people in radio." I was really into that thing back then. That was keeping me back. That was my hurdle that I had to jump. And he said, "Go for it, man." When I first started boxing, people laughed at me. But look what happened.
Stephen, you wrote a book about him almost as a revolutionary figure. What was so inspiring to you?
Well, he's in a lot of ways the great figure of my lifetime, of anybody of my generation. There are all kinds of different figures that are important on this planet. But in terms of athletes, there's no point of comparison because of what he came to mean outside of the ring. But, you know, originally, as a kid, it was because he was different, right? He was, I don't remember a time in my life when he didn't exist. I remember that my first sports memory is watching him fight Henry Cooper on television as a kid with my dad. And he was young, and he was beautiful, and he was funny, and he had the poetry, and he talked. And he was the heavyweight champion of the world, which then, you know, was the greatest single title in sport. If you were the heavyweight champion of the world, everybody knew who you were. He stood on top of the mountain. But I think, you know, he became, for people of my generation, I think he came to represent us versus the generation that had gone before. You know, my dad was a Joe Louis guy. There was that divide, you know, that's a boxing divide, but it became more of a political divide in a lot of households. You were on one side or you were on the other. You were a guy from that generation who worshipped deferential Joe Louis, who went and joined the army in the Second World War, or you were an Ali guy. And that, I'll tell you, every household in those days, when Ali came along, was split right down the middle between the parents and the kids. And that, not just a race divide, you know.
Civil War.
I think there are a lot of African-Canadian, African-American households that were split right there as well.
The quote that Obama chose from Ali, I thought was pretty amazing, that Ali said, "I am America, black, confident, cocky. Get used to me." He was, what was it about him? Was it that pride, that dignity?
Well, the fact is, one thing that really got him going was the fact that he was probably maybe the first trash talker out there, real legitimate trash talker who predicted and he made it happen. And that really, I mean, that just mystified people, but we loved it. I never saw a fighter with the hand and speed movement that he had, but he also, he got under people's skin because especially after he announced his becoming a black Muslim, and he called white people devils and did things. He had people angry with him. I remember one person saying to him, well, Elijah Muhammad says all white people are devils. Do you believe that? He said, if Elijah Muhammad says it, then I believe it. But in saying that, Ali never had hatred in him. He didn't dislike whites. I don't believe that for a moment. But he did speak out for his people at a time when we needed someone out there to speak out for us. There was a lot of injustices going on. Let me just be very quick. I mean, when this guy refused to go into the Army, now he could have had a cushy job just like Joe Louis and Ray Robinson, but he said no. He sacrificed millions of dollars. And I wonder, and Steve might agree with me, we never perhaps saw Ali fight in his prime, 26 to 30 years old.
For 3.5 years, he couldn't fight.
3.5 years,
yeah, he did not fight those prime years for heavyweight, pretty much.
Oh, yeah. No, I think with the lost years of Ali are one of the great mysteries in sport, what they would have been. But, you know, the test of Ali, whatever the initial decision was when he found out he was draft eligible and said, I don't want to go. There are a lot of people saying, I don't want to go in those days. But the war was popular. The war in Vietnam was widely supported at that time. So we're talking about the early 1960s.
A lot of people hated him for that decision.
And a lot of people hated him. Look, there are people still out there, if you get past the natural kind of emotion that comes when somebody dies, you can find people who say he betrayed his country. You know, my country, right or wrong. But he decided, you know, I'm not going to go. You know, in part originally in part based on his conviction as a member of the Nation of Islam, who were you know, kind of you know.
He said they were pacifists?
They were pacifists, they were separatists, they were all kinds of things. They weren't associated with mainstream Islam in those days either. They were, you know, they were trying to upset the status quo in a lot of ways. But, you know, I think if you read about that era and the Nation, they would have been quite happy to allow him to go back in the ring at some point and keep things going. He was having with a heavyweight champion of the world, a member of the Nation of Islam, was the best thing that had ever happened to them. But Ali, you know, gave it up, said he didn't know how the story was going to end. As far as he knew, he was going to jail. They stripped him of his license, stripped him of his right to make a living, stripped him of the heavyweight championship of the world. And he said, I don't care. I'm going to follow my convictions. He didn't know there was going to be that second act that he had, which became, you know, a huge part of the story.
I respected him for that because I was against the war back then. I'm a young man. Much of my family lived in Detroit and in North Carolina, in places like that. I respect the fact that he stood up. I love the rebel nature in him because that was always me. Maybe I did it the wrong way. He did it the right way to me. He became a hero because he stood up to the American establishment that treated blacks like something that a 6-week-old puppy left on the carpet, and he stood up against them. That's what I admired. And I think in order to feel that part of it, you have to grow up in oppression and grow up in exclusion. He spoke out, and this is what I respected about him.
But, you know, there's one other point, you know, in that era, again, with the Nation. The civil rights movement, you know, we're talking about the civil rights movement, the nonviolence of Dr. Martin Luther King. The Nation didn't go for that stuff. Floyd Patterson, who was a previous heavyweight champion, was kind of the model for the integrationists. He was the civil rights movement. He was the hero. And again, a kind of a quiet, deferential, polite, we will wait our turn, but eventually things will come around kind of guy. The Nation wasn't saying that kind of stuff. And there were people within the civil rights movement, African Americans within the civil rights movement, who didn't want anything to do with the Nation. And for them, the rhetoric that was coming from the Nation through Ali was not a good thing.
He was so divisive, and a lot of white Americans who didn't admire him back then do seem to now, but
well, it's politically correct now, or you know, memories are short, you know, and there's all these generations that have come up since them. They've heard nothing but positive things about him.
But he wasn't a saint.
No.
Right?
Oh, no, he wasn't. No.
Are we allowed to say that 2 days later?
I think we can say that.
Ali wasn't a saint, and there was only one saint to me, and that was Jesus Christ. I mean, if you want to look at somebody who was flawless, according to the scriptures, I don't know anybody else, Ali wasn't a saint.
He had quite the sharp tongue.
Yeah, he did.
About his competitors in particular, said some pretty nasty things.
Yeah, and some of it was, you know, beating the drum to sell tickets.
Well, but he called Joe Frazier and Uncle Tom. That was wrong.
Yeah, and he had a gorilla in front of him and called him a gorilla. He used.
Now, if somebody else did that, they would be a racist. But I got to say, I mean, Joe Frazier was a wonderful man. He wasn't an Uncle Tom. And them's fighting words. You go to the projects in Detroit or Chicago or anywhere, and you call a black man an Uncle Tom. You may end up 6 feet under.
But you know, the main thing, I think, Wayne, is that, you know, when he made that decision, said, I'm not going. I ain't got nothing against them Viet Cong. We were in one world. By the time he came back to boxing, 1970, 71, the world had changed. right? Opinions had changed. The opinions about the war had changed. There was a massive shift to the side that Ali was on, and his heroism. That's the point when people start to think Ali's a hero, because they realized that the war was wrong.
What should he be remembered for, Spider, do you think?
From my perspective, for me, he was courageous, a man of courage, a man of conviction. And
you deal with a lot of young people now.
Yes, I do.
Do they remember him? Do they see him the way you do?
Well, they do from passing the word down. This is what we do. We pass the word down. When I do the Black History Month during February, I love Martin Luther King and Mandela, but I talk about Muhammad Ali because he had that impact on me. And I knew him at a personal level. So I preach that and share that as a mentor and a teacher to my young people. I mean, Ali, whatever he did, even when he was fighting against the American establishment, he didn't do it violently, and he didn't preach violence.
What will he be remembered for, do you think, Stephen?
I hope he's remembered a bit for being a dangerous man, because he was a dangerous man. He was dangerous in the ring, and he was dangerous outside the ring. I think that edge, it's been lost a little bit in the sentimentalization of him, especially since Atlanta and the Olympics and the silent saint of later years, the kind of Buddha figure, and now the people putting out these things that he allegedly said, kind of wise words that I don't think he ever said them. Not that he wasn't wise, but I just think there was an industry built around this idea of a benign Muhammad Ali. He was not benign. He was dangerous. He tried to upset the apple cart, and anybody who stood across the ring from him knew he was dangerous. I would like people to remember that, because we wouldn't be having this conversation if he wasn't.
Well, it's so great to hear your stories. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.